What if the food you've trusted for decades to build strength slowly stops serving your body after 75? And something as humble as cheese becomes a far more powerful ally than eggs, not by myth, but by biology, aging physiology, and the quiet logic of how the human body changes with time. Asterisk, this speech is for educational and informational purposes only. It does not replace medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Individual health needs vary, and dietary choices should always be discussed with qualified healthcare professionals, especially for older adults or those with medical conditions. Asterisk, as the body moves beyond 75. Digestion no longer behaves like it did in youth, not because it fails, but because it becomes more conservative with energy, more selective. With resources and less willing to perform complex biochemical tasks at the same speed, the stomach produces less acid, digestive enzymes decline, and the small intestine absorbs nutrients with slightly reduced efficiency. Protein, which once flowed easily into muscle tissue, now faces subtle barriers on its journey through the body. Eggs, long celebrated as a symbol of perfect protein, still hold nutritional value. Yet their structure requires a level of digestive effort that an aging system may not always manage optimally. What once was ideal can become merely adequate, and adequacy is not always enough when the body is trying to preserve strength against the quiet tide of muscle loss. With age, the phenomenon of muscle fading does not announce itself loudly. It begins with small signals, slower movements, weaker grip, longer recovery times. Scientists call this gradual decline sarcopenia. But behind the term lies a simple reality: the body's ability to convert dietary protein into muscle becomes less efficient. This means that older adults often need protein that is not just abundant, but strategically usable. Certain cheeses, especially those that are aged or fermented, contain proteins that are partially broken down during their maturation process. This natural transformation makes amino acids more accessible, allowing the aging digestive system to absorb and utilize them with less metabolic effort. In this sense, cheese becomes not merely a food, but a pre-processed form of nutrition shaped by time, mirroring the body's own journey through time. There is also the role of fat, often misunderstood yet deeply relevant in later life. After 75, the body's relationship with fat changes. Instead of being an enemy, certain fats become allies that slow digestion, stabilize blood sugar, and support hormonal balance. Many cheeses contain a balanced combination of protein and fat that delivers sustained energy rather than abrupt spikes. This steady nutritional rhythm is especially important for older individuals whose metabolic systems are less tolerant of extremes. Eggs, while nutritious, are relatively lean in comparison, and their benefits may be limited when the body requires a more layered nutritional profile to maintain tissue integrity. Beyond chemistry, there is a subtle philosophical dimension to this shift. Aging is not simply a process of loss, it is a process of refinement. The body becomes less capable of handling raw complexity and more responsive to concentrated, thoughtfully structured nourishment. Cheese, shaped through fermentation and time, reflects this principle. Is food that has already undergone transformation, offering the aging body something closer to what it can readily use rather than something it must struggle to convert. In this way, nutrition after 75 is no longer about tradition or habit, but about alignment between biological reality and dietary choice. Asterisk, as the years pass, bones begin to tell a quiet story that is not visible on the surface, but deeply written within their structure. Youth, bones are dense, flexible, and constantly renewing themselves with an effortless rhythm. After 75, this rhythm slows, and the balance between building and breakdown subtly shifts. The body continues to lose mineral content year by year, not dramatically but persistently, until strength becomes more fragile than it appears. Calcium, often spoken of as a simple nutrient, becomes something far more complex in this stage of life. It is no longer just a substance to consume. It is a substance that must be guided, directed, and integrated correctly into the architecture of the skeleton. The challenge is not merely how much calcium enters the body, but where it ultimately goes. Without proper biochemical signals, calcium can wander into soft tissues and blood vessels rather than reinforcing bones. This is where the hidden intelligence of certain cheeses becomes relevant. Many traditional cheeses contain not only calcium, but also fat-soluble nutrients that help the body understand what to do with that calcium. Vitamin K2, present in some fermented dairy products, acts like a subtle messenger, guiding minerals toward bones and away from arteries. This guidance is not dramatic or immediate, but cumulative, shaping bone density over years rather than days. The aging digestive system also changes how minerals are absorbed. Stomach acid, which helps dissolve calcium and make it absorbable, gradually decreases with age. When calcium is consumed in isolation, it may pass through the body with limited impact. In cheese, calcium is embedded within a matrix of proteins and fats that enhance its bioavailability. The body does not receive calcium as an isolated chemical, but as part of a biologically meaningful structure that it recognizes and uses more. Effectively, this difference becomes increasingly important after 75, when every percentage of absorption matters. Bones are not static pillars. They are living tissues in constant conversation with muscles, hormones, and nerves. Nutrition fails to support this dialogue. Bones become brittle, not only physically but functionally. Certain cheeses provide a dense combination of minerals and supportive nutrients in relatively small portions, which is crucial for older individuals whose appetite and digestive capacity may be reduced. Instead of requiring large volumes of food, the body receives concentrated building materials that align with its reduced but more selective metabolic capacity. There is also an emotional dimension to bone health that science often overlooks. Fear of falling, hesitation in movement, and gradual withdrawal from physical activity often accompany weakening bones. Nutrition that genuinely strengthens skeletal structure does more than preserve density. It restores confidence in movement and presence in life. When food supports the body at this foundational level, it becomes more than nourishment. It becomes a quiet reinforcement of stability and dignity in aging. As the brain ages, it does not simply lose speed or capacity. It changes its priorities, its rhythms, and its tolerance for internal imbalance. After 75, the brain becomes less forgiving of chronic inflammation and metabolic instability. Processes that once ran silently in the background begin to influence mood, memory, and clarity of thought. Inflammation, in particular, becomes a subtle force that shapes how the brain experiences the world. It does not always manifest as pain or obvious illness, but as fatigue, fog, slower reactions, and a quiet sense of disconnection from one's own mental sharpness. Nutrition at this stage becomes less about stimulation and more about restoration. Certain cheeses contain fatty acids that support the structural integrity of brain cells. Neurons are not just electrical wires. They are living membranes that depend on healthy fats to maintain flexibility and communication. When these membranes become rigid or damaged, signals travel less efficiently, and cognitive functions gradually weaken. The fats present in some cheeses are not merely calories. They are components of the brain's physical architecture. By supplying these building blocks, the diet can subtly reinforce the brain's ability to process information, regulate emotions, and sustain attention. The role of micronutrients is equally significant. Minerals and vitamins found in fermented dairy products participate in enzymatic reactions that regulate neurotransmitters and energy production within brain cells. After 75, the efficiency of these reactions declines, not because the brain stops functioning, but because it receives less precise nutritional support. Cheese, particularly varieties shaped by long fermentation, can provide a concentrated spectrum of nutrients in a form that is easier for the aging body to absorb and integrate. This concentration matters when appetite is reduced and the margin for nutritional error becomes narrower. Inflammation in the brain is often linked to systemic inflammation throughout the body. Joints, muscles, and connective tissues send biochemical signals that influence neural function. When diet reduces inflammatory stress, the brain experiences a calmer, internal environment. Certain cheeses, when consumed in balanced amounts, can contribute to this calming effect by providing fats that modulate inflammatory pathways rather than intensify them. The result is not an immediate surge in mental power, but a gradual stabilization of cognitive function that becomes noticeable over time. There is also a psychological aspect to how the aging brain responds to nourishment. Food that is dense, flavorful, and satisfying can stimulate sensory pathways that reinforce engagement with life. Taste, smell, and texture activate neural circuits that are often understimulated in older adults. When nutrition supports both biological and sensory needs, the brain experiences food not as a burden of digestion, but as a meaningful interaction with the environment. In this way, certain cheeses serve not only as nutrients, but as subtle instruments of neural resilience, supporting the aging mind in its effort to remain coherent, responsive, and connected to the world around it. As the body ages, the joints and bones do not exist in isolation. They function as part of an intricate system in which muscles, tendons, ligaments, and nerves constantly exchange signals. After 75, this system becomes more delicate, not because it collapses, but because its margins for error shrink. A slight deficiency in nutrients can disrupt coordination between tissues, leading to stiffness, slower movement, and a gradual loss of stability. Orthopedic health, therefore, is not merely about strengthening bones, but about sustaining the biological conversation that allows the body to move as a unified whole. Muscles, in particular, become increasingly dependent on high-quality nutrition. With age, the body's ability to synthesize new muscle proteins declines, meaning that the same amount of food no longer produces the same effect. Certain cheeses offer a dense concentration of amino acids that can stimulate muscle maintenance, even when overall food intake is reduced. This density is crucial because older adults often experience diminished appetite, early satiety, and changes in taste perception. When the volume of food decreases, the importance of nutrient concentration increases. Cheese, in this context, becomes a strategic source of biological resources rather than a simple dietary preference. Connective tissues also require specific nutrients to maintain elasticity and strength. Collagen fibers, which give tendons and ligaments their resilience, depend on a steady supply of supportive molecules derived from diet. While no single food can preserve connective tissue indefinitely, certain cheeses provide combinations of proteins and fats that support the metabolic processes underlying tissue repair. After 75, recovery from minor injuries slows, and even everyday movements can produce microdamage within tissues. Nutrition that supports repair mechanisms becomes a quiet but essential factor in maintaining mobility. Nerves play an equally important role in orthopedic health. The ability to sense position, balance, and pressure depends on neural pathways that connect muscles and joints to the brain. These pathways rely on stable energy supply and healthy cell membranes. The fats present in some cheeses contribute to the maintenance of nerve cell structure, supporting communication between the nervous system and musculoskeletal system. When this communication weakens, the risk of falls and injuries increases. Not because the bones are necessarily weak, but because the body loses its internal coordination. There is a subtle shift in how the body interprets food after. Instead of seeking abundance, it seeks precision. Large meals become burdensome, while smaller, nutrient-dense portions become more effective. Cheese exemplifies this shift because it delivers concentrated energy and structural nutrients in modest amounts. The aging body does not need to be overwhelmed with calories. It needs to be supplied with materials that match its reduced but highly specific metabolic capacity. In this way, the choice of food becomes a form of biological strategy, shaping how muscles, joints, and nerves continue to cooperate in the quiet effort to preserve movement and independence. As time advances, the relationship between the body and age transforms from resistance to negotiation. Youth often carries the illusion that strength is permanent and that habits once established will serve indefinitely. After this illusion dissolves, replaced by a quieter awareness that the body operates according to evolving rules. Longevity is no longer about pushing the body beyond its limits, but about listening to its changing language. Nutrition becomes less about tradition and more about dialogue. A continuous adjustment between what the body once needed and what it now requires to sustain balance. Many people approach aging with a mindset of battle, attempting to preserve youthful patterns of eating, movement, and recovery. Yet the biology of aging suggests a different approach: adaptation rather than opposition. The digestive system slows, hormonal patterns shift, and cellular repair mechanisms become more selective. Foods that once fueled rapid growth and intense activity may no longer align with these slower, more deliberate processes. The body begins to favor nutrients that are concentrated, easily absorbed, supportive of long-term stability rather than short-term energy. In this sense, dietary evolution becomes an expression of biological wisdom rather than compromise. There is a profound connection between habit and identity, especially in food. People often cling to familiar choices because they represent continuity. In a world that feels increasingly uncertain with age, the body itself is not static. It is constantly reshaping its internal priorities. When nutrition adapts to these priorities, it reflects an acceptance of change rather than a denial of it. Choosing foods that align with aging physiology is not a rejection of the past, but a recognition that survival and dignity in later life require flexibility. The act of eating becomes less about nostalgia and more about precision. Scientific understanding reveals that aging cells respond differently to nutrients than younger cells. They require signals that support repair, reduce inflammation, and stabilize metabolic fluctuations. When the diet provides these signals, the body functions, not as a machine in decline, but as a system seeking equilibrium. Food, in this context, becomes a form of communication between conscious choice and unconscious biology. Each meal sends instructions that shape how tissues repair, how bones retain density, how muscles preserve tone, and how the brain maintains clarity. Beyond physiology, there is an ethical dimension to how society perceives aging. Older individuals are often encouraged to maintain youthful lifestyles without acknowledging the biological realities they face. True longevity is not about imitation of youth, but about cultivating harmony between age and environment. Where nutrition reflects this harmony, it supports not only physical survival, but psychological acceptance of time. The body, when nourished according to its evolving nature, ceases to feel like an adversary and begins to feel like a partner in the ongoing process of existence. Where adaptation becomes the most sophisticated form of strength and awareness, becomes the foundation of sustained well-being.